I'd like to call the May 18th Common Council meeting to order. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilwoman Brown.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and
Justice for all. Roll call, Clerk Treasurer Porte.
Councilwoman Ficus.
Present.
Councilwoman West. Councilman Galloway. Councilwoman Cutler.
Present.
Councilman Frankie.
Present.
Councilman Vincent.
Here.
Councilwoman Brown. All present.
Approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes is presented. Second.
I have a motion and second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Petition and comments of citizens. Again, we've had more interaction since we've gone to Zoom meetings than we've had probably in the last year. So we will keep this open throughout the meeting. Are there any comments or questions as of right now? There are not, so we will move on. Council appointment to the Economic Development Commission. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to reappoint Kevin Gould.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. We will then move to Nick Minnick. Are you on? Okay, we'll come back to Nick Minnick. And Councilwoman Ficus, second and final reading of the ordinance.
Your Honor, I move to read an ordinance for the second time by title only.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Councilwoman Ficus.
An ordinance amending ordinance 18-2019 of the state of LaPorte, Indiana to establish salary for a new position in the engineering department.
Do we have any discussion? Well, since he's not on, maybe we'll take it back from it. Just a little humor. Okay, any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor state by saying aye.
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 Oh, I'm sorry, we do need a motion.
Make a motion to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
Motion, a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Councilman Frankie, second and final reading of an ordinance.
Your Honor, I move to read for the second and final time an ordinance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Councilman Frankie.
The title of the ordinance is Dangerous Animals for the City of LaPorte, Indiana.
Discussion? Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve the ordinance is presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Councilman Frankie, could you just give a brief overview of that bill again?
Yeah, so the amendment to that ordinance is to include in the language for punishments for attacks from animal to animal as well as animal to person. Prior, the ordinance defined dangerous animals as animal attacks on animals or animal attacks on persons, but none of the punishments were in line in terms of the language. So it's just adding the language to include animal on animal as well as animal on person.
Great. Thank you, Councilman Frankie. Councilwoman Cutler, introduction of a resolution.
Your Honor, I move to introduce resolution read for the first and only time in its entirety.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Councilwoman Cutler.
A resolution approving use of enterprise zone investment deduction credits within a tax increment financing district. Whereas Catalyst HRE LLC, herein Catalyst, has requested of the Common Council of the City of LaPorte approval to use enterprise zone real property investment deduction credits within a tax increment TIF district, specifically the Central Business District Allocation Area Number 3. And whereas Catalyst capital investment of $15 million for a new 57,000 square foot facility is expected to house approximately 125 jobs. And whereas the city planner for the City of LaPorte has provided an analysis showing that use of the investment deduction credits would not adversely affect any TIF obligation in the TIF district. Now therefore be it resolved by the Common Council of the City of LaPorte as follows. Number 1, that Catalyst requests to use enterprise zone investment deduction credits within the Central Business District Allocation Area Number 3. Number 2, said credits shall be for a period of 10 years. And 3, Catalyst agrees to a fee of 35% of its investment deduction credit savings paid to the LaPorte Urban Enterprise Zone each year for a period of 10 years to maintain eligibility in the program. And a resolution.
I have a motion.
I move to approve the resolution as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second discussion, and I'd like to, if I could, bring Bert Cook on to discuss maybe in layman's term.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Bert Cook, Executive Director of the LaPorte Economic Advancement Partnership. On the call with us today, I have Anthony Lampsona, who is the Chief Development Officer for Catalyst HRE. He's here to answer any questions that maybe you might have I can't answer. But before we get to that, some of the council members who have been on the council a little longer remember seeing similar resolutions over the years. So in the instance where a company would like to use the investment deduction offered through the LaPorte Urban Enterprise Association, and the project is occurring within an allocation area or a TIF district, they have to come in front of the council in order for your blessing on the credits. The reason we do that is because potentially in allocation areas, you could have bond issuances that would be affected by this decision. In this particular instance, we don't have any, but I want to walk through a couple what I think are important points of this particular project. So this is about a 60,000 square foot building that will be privately owned but attached to LaPorte Hospital. The building will house 125 people once it's completed. It's about $15 million capital investment. Now, an interesting thing, working with SEH, who provides some financial services to the city, and as part of those services earlier in the year, this project came up and we had a discussion about the investment deduction and how it impacts the city's overall finances. And interestingly, while the incentive does benefit Catalyst and it has a positive impact on a reduction in their property tax liability, at the same time, because of the effects of tax caps on LaPorte, it also would represent an increase in funding to the city. And that's because the company pays 35% of whatever savings it generates to the Urban Enterprise Association. And again, the council and the mayor both make appointments, multiple appointments to the Urban Enterprise on board. We talk about the good work that they've done within our community. And so by allowing this company to claim this credit, in a unique scenario, it benefits both the city and the company at the same time. And so it seems like a no-brainer. I think you all are pretty comfortable. We've been through this before. But if there are questions that exist, I'd be happy to try and answer those. Because we're on the Zoom platform here, Anthony, made it a point to take time out of his night to be here to answer any question. If there's something that I can't answer that you have specific, I'm sure he can jump on and try to answer those as well. But please, any questions you might have, I'll be happy to try and answer.
Anthony, you would like to add, by the way, we welcome you to the city council meeting. Great.
Appreciate that, considering the real special parts. They've hired Robin Morton, the same company who has constructed the current hospital, will just stay on site and continue to work. And mayor and council people, most of you toured the facility, you know that a huge portion of the people that are working out on that site are local residents. It's a huge win for our community, and it's something that I think we should all be very grateful for.
Well, especially during this time, I think compared to a lot of communities, we seem to have a lot of projects and a lot of people working during this tough time in our community.
Yes, sir.
Are there any questions from the council? Hearing none. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm sorry. And all in favor, 1 nay. I'm going to ask for roll call, and I'll turn my mic off.
Councilman Brown.
Aye.
Councilman Ficus.
Aye.
Councilwoman West.
Aye.
Councilman Galloway. Councilwoman Cutler.
Aye.
Councilman Frankie.
Aye.
Councilman Vincent.
Aye.
All.
Okay.
Yep.
Motion passes 7-0. I apologize. I thought I heard a nay. Before we go back to Dick Minnick, who we're going to now make wait since he wasn't there, we'll go to Councilman Vincent, introduction of an ordinance of the city of LaPorte.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to introduce an ordinance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Councilman Vincent.
An ordinance of the city of LaPorte, Indiana, authorizing the issuance of the city of LaPorte, Indiana, taxable economic development revenue bonds, F&C Development Incorporated project. The lending of the proceeds thereof to Greater LaPorte Economic Development Corporation, and authorizing and approving other actions in respect thereto. Whereas the city of LaPorte, Indiana, the city is a political subdivision of the state of Indiana, and by virtue of IC 36-7-11.9 and IC 36-7-12, collectively the Act, is authorized and empowered to adopt this ordinance, the bond ordinance, and to carry out provisions. Whereas Greater LaPorte Economic Development Corporation, or an affiliate thereof, the borrower, is desired to provide funds to F&C Development, the developer, enable the developer to finance all or a portion of the cost of the acquisition, construction, renovation, and equipment of a mixed-use project consisting of retail, commercial, and/or office space and residential units, together and related amenities and improvements project, which will be located in the central business application area number 4, the F&C area, created by the LaPorte Redevelopment Commission in the city, which is a project the borrower anticipates leasing from the developer and then subleasing to the LaPorte Redevelopment Commission and the developer. Whereas the borrower has advised the Porte Economic Development Commission and the city that it possesses that the city issues its tax economic development revenue bond, FNC development project, in one or more series with an appropriate series designation for each, in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $9 million. The bonds under this act and loan proceeds of such bonds to the borrower for the purpose of providing such funds to the developer for the financing of the project. Whereas the completion of the project results in the diversification of industry, the creation and retention of jobs, and the creation and retention of business opportunities in the city. Whereas pursuant to IC 36-7-12-24, the commission published notice of a public hearing on the proposed issuance of the bonds to finance the project. Whereas the commission has heretofore held the public hearing on the project, and whereas the commission has performed all the actions required by the act preliminary to the adoption of the bond ordinance, and has approved and forwarded to the Common Council in the forms of the loan agreement, note, trust indenture, and other financing documents collectively referred to as the financing agreement. Therefore, be it ordained by the City Common Council as follows. Section 1, findings, public benefit. The Common Council finds and determines that the project involves the acquisition of construction, renovation, and equipping an economic development facility. As that used in the project will increase and retain employment opportunities and increase diversification of economic development in the city. It will improve and promote economic stability, development, and welfare within the city. It will encourage and promote the expansion of industry, trade, and commerce in the city, and at the location of new businesses in the city, and therefore that the finance of the project by the issuance of bonds under the Act 1 will be a benefit to the health and general welfare of the city, and 2, complies with the Act. Section 2, approval of financing. The proposed financing of the project by the issuance of bonds under the Act in the form of such financing was approved by the Commission, is hereby approved. Section 3, authorization of the bonds. The issuance of the bonds payable solely from the revenues and receipts derived from the financing agreement is hereby authorized. Section 4, terms of the bonds. The bonds in aggregate principal amounts not to exceed $9 million shall 1, be executed at or prior to the closing date of the manual or fence, the facsimile signatures of the mayor and the clerk treasurer of the city. 2, be dated as of the date of their delivery. 3, mature on the date not later than 25 years after the date of issuance. 4, bear interest at such rates not to exceed 7% per annum as determined through public bidding or private negotiation with the purchaser thereof, as determined by the clerk treasurer prior to the sale thereof, and such interest payable as provided in the financing agreements. 5, be issued in such denominations as set forth in the financing agreements. 6, be issued only in fully registered form. 7, be subject to registration on the bond register as provided in the financing agreements. 8, be payable in lawful money in the United States of America. 9, be payable at the office as provided in the financing agreements. 10, be subject to the optional redemption prior to maturity and subject to redemption as otherwise provided in the financing agreements. 11, issued in one or more series. And 12, contain such other items and provisions as may be provided in the financing agreement. Item B of that subsection, the bond and the interest thereon do not and shall never constitute an indebtedness of or a charge against the general credit or taxing power of the city, but shall be special and limited obligations of the city, payable solely from revenues and other amounts derived from financing agreements. Forms of the financing agreements are before this meeting and are by this reference incorporated into the bond ordinance, and the clerk treasurer of the city is hereby directed in the name and on behalf of the city to insert them into the meeting minutes of the Common Council and to keep them on file. Now, Section 5, sale of the bonds. The mayor and the clerk treasurer of the city are hereby authorized and directed in the name and on behalf of the city to sell bonds to the purchaser or purchasers selected by such officers, either through public bidding or by a private negotiation at such prices not less than 99% of the par amount thereof, and on such terms as may be determined at the time of the sale. Section 6, execution and delivery of the financing agreements. The mayor and the clerk treasurer of the city are hereby authorized and directed in the name and on behalf of the city to execute and endorse and deliver the loan agreements, the promissory notes from the borrower to the city, the trust indenture, and the bonds submitted to the common council, which are hereby approved in respect. Section 7, changes in financing agreements. The mayor and clerk treasurer of the city are hereby authorized in the name and on behalf of the city, without further approval from the common council or the commission, to approve such changes in the financing agreements as may be permitted by the act. Such approval to be conclusively evidenced by their execution thereof. Section 8, in general, the mayor and the clerk treasurer of the city and each of them are hereby authorized and directed in the name and on behalf of the city to execute or endorse any and all agreements, documents, or instruments, perform any and all acts, approve any and all matters, do any and all other things deemed by them or either of them to be necessary or desirable in order to carry out and comply with the intent, conditions, and purposes of this bond ordinance, including the preamble hereto and the documents mentioned herein. The project. The issuance and the sale of the bonds and then securing the bonds under the financing agreement and any such execution, endorsement, performance, and or doing other things thereto affected be is hereby ratified and approved. Section 9, binding effect. The provisions of the bond ordinance and the financing agreement securing the bonds shall constitute a binding contract between the city and the holders of the bonds, and the issuance of the bonds. This bond ordinance shall not be repealed or amended in any respect which would adversely affect the rights of the holders of the bonds, as long as the bonds or interest thereon remains unpaid. Section 10, the repeal. Any ordinance or parts of the ordinances in conflict herewith are hereby repealed. In addition, the ordinance shall be deemed to supersede ordinance number 6-2020 adopted on May 4, 2020, which is hereby repealed. Section 11, the effective date. This bond ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon the adoption and compliance with IC 36-4-6. Section 12, final section. Copies of financing agreements on file. 2 copies of the financing agreement incorporated into this bond ordinance are duly filed in the office of the clerk treasurer of the city and are available for public inspection in accordance with IC 36-1-5-4.
Councilman Vincent, great work, sir.
Thank you.
So if I could have Bert Cook maybe summarize layman's terms.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to start by saying, hopefully everyone here recognizes that this is very, very similar to an ordinance that you passed at the last meeting. And I apologize for that, Councilman Vincent, especially to you for having to read that in its entirety a second time. We're doing everything by the book, and I'll take full responsibility. We got a little bit ahead of ourselves with the ordinance that we put in front of you at the last meeting. We have an additional step that needs to occur between now and your June 1st meeting, which is the meeting of the Economic Development Commission. So we have scheduled that. We intend to handle that. We'll consider this issue, and then after consideration, we'll send it back to the council with the recommendation, at which time then you would have the ability to act one way or another on the ordinance. So I apologize. It is the same ordinance with one minor change, which is section 10, add some language about repealing the previous ordinance. So really no change other than that. But just so you're aware, we'll have this for a vote for you at your next meeting on June 1st. And in the interim, the Economic Development Commission will meet and consider this as well.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cook? And again, this process helps put into place that we could see shovels in the ground at the Flaherty Collins project in July, early July. Correct?
That is correct, Mayor. Yes, this is the bond issuance process is a very long, drawn-out one. It takes 6 months, and there's a lot of steps that go through. And again, this is one of those steps, all leading to vertical construction in July.
Great. Any other discussion, questions? Hearing none, I also like to put out there, Tom Casey's on the line here for the meeting and has been involved with Flaherty and Collins as well. Mr. Casey, anything you'd like to add?
Sorry, I was on mute there, Mayor. Nothing, just very excited about getting the project going and look forward to seeing ground being broken shortly.
Great. Councilwoman Brown, introduction of an ordinance.
Your Honor, I move to introduce an ordinance read for the first time in its entirety. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
An ordinance establishing Fund 150 Transit COVID and Fund 151 CDBG COVID. Whereas the Common Council of the City of LaPorte recognizes that it is required by the State Board of Accounts to establish separate accounts for any funds received from Congress, the federal government, or the state of Indiana due to COVID-19. Now therefore be it ordained by the Common Council of the City of LaPorte, Indiana, that Section 1, the Common Council of the City of LaPorte shall authorize creation of the following funds: Fund 150 Transit COVID and Fund 151 CDBG COVID. Section 2, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect from and after its passage, approval, and publication according to the law. End of ordinance.
Thank you, Councilwoman Brown. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but are there any questions? Hearing none, we'll put that on the agenda for next meeting. Now we'll move to, I think is an exciting time. Nick Minnick, our engineer, has spent many hours preparing a road funding program that everybody looks forward to, but you can't make everybody happy. And I think you've made great progress, and I think people should be overall excited about the dollars that we have coming in. And I think from an education perspective, one thing I've learned is what it truly costs to repair roads, put in new roads, and I think this will give you some ideas. So I'll turn that over to our engineer, Nick Minnick.
Thank you, and I believe Tim was going to get everything up and running as far as presentation.
Yes, we have it on.
We're good to go.
Thank you for having me tonight. I apologize, I wasn't able to join earlier, had a little computer issue. Just wanted to join and give you an update on our paving program this year. At the end of last year, we received funds in the amount of $1.3 million. It was a little over that, but after bidding, we were able to get a project for about $1.3 million. That project is underway. Sidewalk work has started, and we will see some pavement hopefully next week or the week after that. So this is a presentation that we put together. It's been presented for both
Nick,
EMA, and then we also did an additional video that's available on the city website.
Nick, I apologize. I said we were good to go, but it dropped the presentation. Give me 1 second. I'll try and get that back up.
Okay.
Tim, I have it on my computer.
Yep. I need it on mine for the stream. Here we go. All right, we should be back up here. You're good to go, Nick.
Okay. Just as a reminder to the council, we do have right around 113 miles of city streets in the city of LaPorte. We've been taking a serious effort at trying to improve those streets. In 2015, we had about a $2 million program. But after that point is when we really started addressing our streets differently and adopted an asset management plan. 2016 is also the time when we started collecting money for wheel tax and creating a sustainable revenue source in order to properly address our streets. So since 2016, we've addressed about 43 of those 113 miles of streets. With the projects we're doing this year, we're going to push it over 50% of the streets addressed. If you take into account 2015, there's more than that. But like I said, That program wasn't necessarily in line with our current asset management plan, so we like to use 2016 as our benchmark for kind of where we started and where we're going. I think it's also important to remember, and as council members, you know, the budget is always a challenge to figure out how to make everything work for the city. Street paving is not a cheap endeavor. It is very expensive. We've been looking at programs that are ranging in the $100,000 to $200,000 per mile amount for the past 4 to 5 years. Most of those programs have been mill and resurface, which is just taking off the first 1.5 inches of surface and then replacing that. And then we've also done some maintenance and some full depth pavement replacement. This has allowed us through our asset management program to do a little bit more. The $100,000 to $200,000 per mile is not something we're going to be seeing anytime soon, but that is kind of designed. The prices do fluctuate, but our programs have been costing right around that per year. The other thing that when we talk to the community, they don't always understand because they want to know when their street's getting done. And with an asset management program, we don't just look at one street. We don't just look at the one right in front of somebody. We have to look at the whole network. And in doing so, we've changed the way we do things. Like I said, before 2016, it was really a kind of a worst first process. So people would find a really bad street and they'd want it done. And those streets would come to the engineer and the engineer would figure out which ones they could do. That doesn't work for us anymore. So we've moved away from that scenario. Things are just overall complicated. So getting the funds and making sure that we're using them appropriately. There's a diagram here kind of depicting how we used to get our funds. And it's just overall, you know, very cumbersome process to even get to where we are dollar-wise. So the worst first method of a paving program really wasn't working for us. When we look at paving costs for a new road, kind of a general rule of thumb would be $1 million per lane mile. So if you have a 2-lane street, you're looking at $2 million to fully reconstruct a road. And like I said, we've been spending about $100,000 to $200,000 to just kind of maintain our decent roads in good condition. But because we haven't been following the worst first, and we haven't been addressing all of the really bad streets right up front, we've been able to create enough revenue to go back and address those streets. So what we do is we rate all of our streets on a 1 to 10 scale. Those ratings are then put into our asset management program. Our current score is a 5.7. We started at a 4.6 after that $2 million of paving in 2015. And our goal by 2023 is to be at a 7. We believe that a 7 on the PACER rating for our entire network is a pretty healthy place for our streets to be. So we're inching our way that direction. And like I said, with the work we're doing this year, we're doing a lot of streets that have very low PACER ratings. So we should see a pretty good increase to that number. And like I said, hopefully getting us to that 7.0 by 2023. So where does the money come from? So the programs we're doing this year are both funded through the Community Crossings Grant Program, which is from the state of Indiana. 50-50 funding, so we have to come up with 50% and they provide 50% of that funding. We also have in process some federal grants, so we utilize federal dollars. Most communities can't utilize these dollars for the type of paving we do. They can use them for kind of larger projects. With a federally approved asset management plan, we've been able to also tap into federal dollars for pavement maintenance. So those are 80-20 dollars, but they are also significantly more difficult to use. So they can only be used on certain streets, and the kind of planning and design process to get those streets even to construction is quite lengthy. So where do we get our funds from? And like I mentioned, the wheel tax was really a game changer for the city. We didn't have an identified annual source of revenue to use for our city streets. City budget really couldn't stretch to address enough of the streets that needed to be addressed. And the wheel tax, which was also a requirement to get the money originally, became that opportunity for us. Now we collect right around $500,000 in wheel tax annually. So even if we utilize every dollar of wheel tax, which we do, as a match for grants, Community Crossings offers up to $1 million, needing $1 million of match. So we're only, with our wheel tax, we're only a little over halfway to being able to utilize all of the grant dollars available through the Community Crossings program. The other thing we have in the city of LaPorte is an impact fee for trash vehicles on our city streets. So we don't collect trash on our own, we contract that, but those vehicles do create wear and tear on our streets. So residents often wonder what the fee on their utility bill is, and it's exactly that. It's the amount of money that we can justify as part of wear and tear of those vehicles on city streets. Those two local matches, which end up being right around $700,000 a year, give or take, end up being our match for the various paving programs we have. And just as a reminder, when we collect the wheel tax and when we collect the street maintenance fee, all of the programs we're utilizing those dollars for are matching grant funds. So every dollar that somebody pays into wheel tax or somebody pays into the utility fee is matched either, by that amount, so doubled, or even multiplied by 4 in the case of our federal grants. So what are we doing this year? I think everybody's always interested and excited to see what we are doing. This summer, like I said, we started a program that's right around $1.3 million, and it's going to address 3.5 miles of streets. We have been able to transition through our asset management program to more complete paving projects. So we are now working on local streets, and we're working on local streets that have lower pacer ratings. Most of those in the 1 to 2 range. Some of those are 3, depending on what's around them, but generally very low pacer ratings that require full depth pavement replacement. So the majority of projects we're looking at this year are full depth pavement replacement projects and some partial reconstruction, which allows us to do some more curb and sidewalk and other things that our streets are in desperate need of. So the streets on the list would be Plain, Clay, Second, Hillcrest, Bosserman, Cook, Evergreen, Edgewood, Southwest, Hines, Southmore, Maple Garden, Pulaski, and Lakeshore Drive. So as you notice, a lot of those are local streets. So they're kind of smaller streets. The smaller streets offer us an opportunity to get this reconstruction done on a street that needs it, and at a little bit lower cost, because most of those are a little bit narrower and just not quite the financial burden as some of the larger arterials and collectors would be to reconstruct. And then this fall, we received a second grant this summer. So this fall, we'll start another program, hopefully complete by the end of the year. If not, it'll be completed in the spring of 2021. But we did receive another $2 million. And again, these are mostly local streets that have lower pacer ratings and require more work. There are some carryover streets from a grant that we've been reapplying for the past 3 grant cycles. So we were grateful that the state finally did approve that grant, but those would be originally mill and resurface, and now they're mill and resurface and some potential full depth pavement in places where they need a little more work. So those streets go up in cost if we don't receive the funds from the state with a grant application. So the streets included in that second program would be Melrose, Fairfield, Linden, Silverbrook, Grandview, Greenwood, Oakdale, Rich, Neeson, Kosciuszko, 14th, 12th, Woodward, Chestnut, McCollum, Jackson, Oregon, K, Illinois, L, Daytona, Plummer, and Laurel. So that, and we have a map here of those streets. We'll work on making sure all this information is available on the city website so that if people have questions, they can see where we're looking at streets. And we also are working on putting up a map of past work too, so everybody can kind of look at the full scope of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 5 years. And if there's any questions, I'm available, always available to call the office, and not that we're always working in the office with the social distancing, but 219-362-2327 would be the number to call for the office, or city website has email contact and other contact for the engineering department and myself.
And Nick, this does not include LRS, MVH money that the street department is working on a daily basis, filling potholes and so forth.
Correct, yeah. So we receive both local road and street funds, motor vehicle highway funds, and then they've separated motor vehicle highway funds into just MVH, which can be used for daily maintenance with street department, snowplow, stuff like that, and then restricted. So the restricted funds have to go into paving projects, and that gap that we talked about, that's where restricted funds really help out, because we're able to fund that additional gap between the $700,000 that we're collecting through wheel tax and trash impact fee, and the maximum of the $1 million in community crossings. And that's not to mention, we may be lucky in 1 year get $1 million from community crossings, and then have a sizable federal aid project that we would need to match also. So those dollars are very important to be able to continue to improve our street network.
And while some people may be frustrated by the wheel tax, I mean, that's something that if we want our community to move forward, if we want our roads to look good, I mean, if we didn't have that right now, and again, I know it can be frustrating, I'll say that we might have $100,000, maybe $100,000 from our side to do roads currently.
Yeah, looking at the revenue sources we have, I think you'd be looking at about a quarter of the paving that we've done if we didn't have that in place.
Are there questions for Nick Minnick? I'd also like to thank Jess Bruder for putting it out there in a very easy, understanding style format that the public can, if they have questions, they're going to be able to ask because they actually understand it. With your help, Nick, of course.
Let's see.
I try not to talk engineering.
It's the third time in a week I've seen Nick do this presentation. It just gets better every time. Nice job, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Nick, for laying it out like this. I think a lot of people that have questions are going to be able to understand now. So thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? Nick, thank you very much. Other business?
I do. Here, Dermody, I have some other business.
Councilwoman Schroeder.
I'd like to share on behalf of the Fire Merit Commission that they extended the deadline for receiving applications for employment eligibility for that list until May 1st. And the new date for the mental aptitude test will be June 27th. And this process will formulate the hiring list for the next 2 years. And also from them as well, as the council, we will need to make an appointment to the LaPorte City Fire Merit Commission as Daryl Kreitz has resigned. His term is 4 years and expires 12/31 of 2021. And this appointment does not need to be a fireman, and the council can appoint from either party. And we also can add this to the agenda for June 1st, our council meeting, if the council is still undecided. And if anyone is interested in being considered for this appointment, they should contact one of the council members. That's it.
Any other business? I would like to add Tim Bakery, which has been on many minds for a long time, is moved to I guess I'll let Tom Casey and Mary Ann have been working extremely hard. Do you want to give us an update on the demolition process there?
Sure, Mayor. Mary Ann has done most of the work, but right now we're in the process of completing the environmental for the building. Once that's done, concurrently, we're also getting bids on the demo. Nick is helping us with that. And once we get the clean environmental, it should come down shortly. So expect hoping next 90 days that building will be down. And we'll be looking at a redevelopment that would benefit low to moderate income families.
Thank you. As well as a reminder that the weather's getting nice, the grass is out, and Jeff Batchelor and the code department are out. One of the focuses we have is Pine Lake Avenue with the sidewalks for people that are coming into the community, that we make sure the grass is clean from the sidewalks, making sure it sparkles. And Jeff has started that process. He's working with the residents, but as well, we want that cleaned up. So that is going to be a focus there if you're hearing any questions or concerns that way. Also, week of July 13th, we've been able, RTS, our provider, has kind of stalled on the spring cleanup. It's now looking like a summer cleanup. The week of July 13th, we will have details later, but that's the week, July 13th through the 17th. We'll have spring cleanup. Please do not put your couches, things out there early now. Wait till that time. I know that's been frustrating, but again, we're in unique times. But with that, are there any other questions, comments? I'd certainly like to thank Bert Cook and for LEAP's work regarding the Maple Lane Mall. I know Sarah Brown has got to be very excited, like the rest of us, but especially in that area for the Maple Lane Mall moving forward. I guess that's why we didn't put Mr. Galloway on. Oh, I thought we muted him. Are there any other comments? I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
We are adjourned. Or all in favor, state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.